Over the past several days, I've watched like a season and a half of Intervention, which was a show that was on A&E. It's now on Hulu. And every episode is exactly the same. It's one or two people who are struggling significantly with an addiction, and their friends and family putting together an intervention, and then they are offered a 3-month stay in a rehab facility. That's every single episode. The other thing that I've noticed in watching a season and a half is that every single one of these people, all their addictions, all stem from their mental and emotional needs not being met. Every single person. This is what becomes a physical health crisis started as a mental health crisis that was never addressed. That was never, none of them have ever mentioned that they were able to spend time in therapy. None of them, so far, for the season and a half that I have watched. And I know that if they had been able to do that when they needed it, when that need first became apparent, I can almost guarantee that it wouldn't have escalated to the point that it escalated to for these people. And the other thing that I wish was in every episode, whether it's during the intervention or before, is for someone to say to them, "You are worth recovery." And I understand that for a lot of these families, these issues have been going on for years. And so they are at their wits' end. They are frustrated. They are angry. They don't know what to do. And so finding a place to address the person struggling and to say with love and compassion, "You are worth recovery," I understand that that's difficult. But that is exactly what that person needs. Because all of them have felt that there is nothing in their life worth saving. That there's nothing about them that is worth their life being better than it currently is, which is terrible. And you can see in the interventions for most of these people how effective it would be for them to hear someone say, "You are worth recovery." Because a lot of the things that make them make up their mind and make them agree to get help is someone in their family saying, "I love you." Someone who they haven't heard say that in a long time. And for setting aside the anger and disappointment and frustration and still saying, "You, where you are, I love you, and I want more for you, and you deserve more." That's what pushes a lot of them to accept, just hearing that. So imagine if they had heard that years ago. Imagine if, and I understand this is hard for children to do, but imagine if even as children, they had had the mental and emotional support to be able to know how to vocalize their need for that support. And if the parents or aunts and uncles, grandparents, other family members were able to recognize signs of those needs not being met, to have the emotional knowledge and education to recognize when you need it, how to voice it, and how to recognize when others need it. And then at the very end of each episode, once they've completed the 3 months of treatment, if they have, they'll check in with the person, and they're like different people because they have had daily therapy, intensive therapy designed to treat all of their needs, to address their needs, to allow them to feel what the drugs have suppressed. And it's like they're new people. And like, think about all that could have been saved if they had had access to therapy years ago. What wouldn't have had to have happened and like, it's an obvious part of the show that is what changes them. Like, yes, it's the physical healing from not being on drugs or alcohol, but it's also the mental healing of why they started taking drugs in the first place. And the show doesn't really comment on what might make any of this better. Like, it's really just, it's setting up who this person is, their background, you speak to their family members, and then you have the intervention. I mean, that's what it's called, intervention. That's what the show is. But I'm wondering, one of my questions I'm wondering as I'm watching this is, who is this show for? What is it trying to do? Is it trying to give advice to families who are dealing with this, of how to have an intervention? Like, not necessarily. That's not the vibe I get from it. Is it exploitative? Well, let's talk about that for a second. So at the beginning of each episode, it says, this person, their name, has agreed to be in a documentary about addiction. Okay, so that's the setup. That's what the person thinks, why the cameras are there, why they're being interviewed. The family knows what it is. The person thinks it's just a documentary about people with addictions. My question is, how can someone in like active addiction really consent to this? Like, if like this episode now exists forever for anyone to see, of them taking drugs, selling drugs. It's just out there. And so even or especially if or when they reach a point where they are in recovery and solid in their recovery and are rebuilding their life, this episode exists showing them in active, extreme addiction. That technically they consented to, but while obviously impaired. Like, I assume there must be some legal paperwork that A&E puts together for everyone to sign. But ethically, how can you say that an addict is consenting to have their image and their story just put out there when they are clearly not in their right mind? They are not well. It's problematic for me. The last thing I want to mention about this show is that of the season and a half that I've watched, which is in like the middle of the run of the series, every single person has been white. Now, there are two ways you can see that. One is some racism on the part of the producers of who they choose. But also, I think it's obvious and fair to say that most black people who would be doing the same things as these white people have already been arrested and are already in jail, and they don't get the opportunity to go to rehab like these white people do. So, thoughts overall. Coming back to the question of what is this show for? Who is this show for? I don't think it's actually trying to do anything. I think it is presenting these experiences as they are, and I think that there is some value in that, but I wonder if it's enough. I wonder if just showing it is enough of a reason to show it. I also feel it's necessary and appropriate to say that I do not have a close friend or family member who has dealt with addiction. And so for that reason, my thoughts on this show are probably understandably different than how someone who has either dealt with it themselves or had a close friend or family member deal with it, who have watched things happen in their own life being shown in the show, that they have that direct, I know exactly what that feels like. That's not the perspective that I'm watching it from or am able to review it from. So it's appropriate to know that, having heard my review. So that is my review, as it is, such as it is, of A&E's Intervention.